Hello, welcome. I'm Commissar Marek, and today I present you my video on The Rebellions. This is an RTS game set in post-apocalyptic setting, which features a campaign as well as custom maps, as well as random maps, the scenarios that are randomly generated, and you can also play them as a standalone mission. What I'm going to be doing is we are going to be playing together a campaign run on 500% difficulty, which means the hardest setting for campaign in this game. What that means is the enemy numbers and timescale of the missions will get significantly harder as we play. Starting from the very first mission, if you are not an experienced player, you can expect to have some trouble going ahead. Now, why am I doing this? And how are we gonna do it? This is gonna be edited content, which means that I'm gonna play the mission, but I'm gonna shorten the duration of the mission significantly in terms of how I edit the video, and then I'm gonna present to you a final cut product where I focus on specific things that I explain in order for you to be able to follow along. Perhaps there are people who would like to play on harder settings, but are intimidated by how hard this game can get. If you select harder settings, and they should not be, as the enjoyment factor is dramatically increased if you play on harder difficulties, in my honest personal opinion. Something to note is this game does not feature a save system, so if you lose your city, which is quite easy to do, a single zombie that infiltrates your city can and will quite swiftly spread the infection, especially through tents, which is going to cause a downfall of the city if you're not ready for it. And there are other things to consider and go into, which I'm going to explain in detail later. But there's a way to generate saves. I do not do that, but that is a way to do it. If you search for this in your search bar, in your browser, you can find people talking about this topic and how to do it. I'm not going to explain how to do it, but just know it is possible. There are maps that are harder than others, especially since the game doesn't label the missions properly. Some of them are marked as one skull or easy difficulty missions, but they are in fact much harder than others. I'm gonna go into detail on which these are. Each of these episodes is going to be one mission only, and then I'm gonna do another. If you will want to watch this, I'm gonna see viewership if people are interested in this or not. That is in the end the most important part of this. Just know that I'm interested in what you think, and if you let me know what would be best, or if you have another strategy that works for you on this difficulty, let me know. I'm always glad to learn something new. And without further ado, let's just jump into it. So, the very first thing that the game is going to ask you is to pick a hero for your campaign when you start it. I personally favor Callus, as he has a slower attack rate and slower movement speed, I believe, but he hits enemies with a splash radius attack, and so each hero can work for you, and they are both equal in terms of strength, but they have their own upsides and downsides. You might want to experiment which one fits your playstyle the most, but ultimately it should not matter which one you pick. They both are able to handle the campaign on this difficulty setting. Just something small to note is that very knowledgeable people on this game who've played it without pausing on hardest skill and things like that are actually of the opinion that these no-build missions are only going to be a slog. Basically, they don't like to play them, and I understand why. In every RTS game, when there is a no-build mission, it feels like it's just a filler. I get why the authors add this to their games, as they want to provide variety in their gameplay, and at least here you do get rewarded for beating these missions as you collect research and empire points from them. I'm gonna explain what these do later. But just know that very respectable people are of the opinion that you should play through these no-build missions or scavenging missions on the lowest skill, just 25% strength of the enemies, just so that you can burn through them quickly and continue playing the RTS game that you paid for, and not play whatever this is, managing one unit over the course of a heavily infested map. I will probably wait until your feedback comes in, what you want to see. If you want me to play through these no-build missions on hardest skill, I can do it for you. I can make it into a video, I can cut it. It might help you to see how it might be approachable for you if you want to follow along. The other option is for me to just do the reasonable thing, pick the low difficulty and just get through them quickly, as we need to get to the more important and interesting parts of the game. After we pick our hero, we can also select the difficulty setting. For me, I'm gonna pick the Apocalypse, which is 800% difficulty setting, which actually brings me to, I was wrong, it is 800%, not 500%, as I said earlier, so it's even worse. Haven't played in a while, so unfortunately, sorry for that mistake. But yes, it is 800% difficulty. Now, after we pick that, we have options where to go, but at the start of the campaign, you can only go to one mission and one mission only, and that is the Hidden Valley, which is in essence a tutorial mission on how this game works. It has a pretty robust tutorial system. If you've never played this game, I encourage you to just try it out on some of the lower difficulties in order for you to learn how things work. And I'm gonna be still covering everything as we go, but just know that you might find this tutorial useful as opposed to just watching this. This is more for the advanced players. In essence, if you've never played this, you probably, some of this won't make too much sense, as I'm not gonna go into the absolute bare bones things, at least most of the time. Right off the bat, as I explained with the text, it's very important to pause the game, take your time, take in your surroundings, order your units around, and queue up some construction. You can refund construction if it is built during the pause. For 100%, otherwise you get refunded something like 60%, 50%, I'm not sure exactly about the amount, but it's less, so you definitely don't want to scrap buildings unless absolutely necessary. What I'm gonna be doing is as I'm showing you around the forest, we can place hunters or fishermen around the shore. You want to make sure that you maximize the potential for this, and so you can place very high yield hunter, for example, in the middle of the forest, but it's gonna mean that you can then only place only few more and not many. And so sometimes it's better to have one hunter that gives you 12, but you can fit more of them overall, than you have someone who does 16, but you can only get him and maybe one other guy, right? And also every building needs to have access to the world. It cannot be enclosed somewhere, and every map in the campaign is built by hand, not generated randomly, which is a very appreciated thing about this game. Every start of each map should begin with building housing. The mechanic in the campaign has the train, which the train is working in a way that is a little bit counterintuitive for new people, and that is, you build a house, in this case we'll be building tents. These tents will start with their construction bar filling up. When it's built, it's gonna be dark and no one's in the tent yet. If it gets infected while it's dark, it's not gonna spawn an infected, but it also doesn't have an income, but it still does cost you the energy and the food to build the tent itself. So the maintaining cost is there. What happens is, at 12 o'clock, you have a train arrive in your colony. When this happens, your tents that are or housing in general that is unoccupied will receive workers and colonists in them. And so you have to plan to maximize the yield and when to set up new housing, so that you don't wait the whole day for a new train, but rather build housing when it makes sense, so that the train fills these houses up in a timely fashion, because taxes mean money and money means expansion, and especially on these harder settings, it's very important to keep expanding quickly and aggressively on many of these maps. Especially this early game, this early in the campaign, we don't have technology. We are really struggling, and we only have very basic tools at our disposal, and so we want to make absolutely sure that we make use of everything we have in order to beat these missions. This one is not that hard, but especially some of the other ones that are also early can be very difficult if you don't have the proper technology. And so again, it's a good habit to start building your senses for efficiency this early on. Now I'm starting to save up enough gold in our stockpile to be able to add 200 from our income in order to afford a sawmill early on. This is important because we want to expand our energy grid towards the stone so we can quarry it to establish a soldier center to begin training of rangers, and in order to do that we will need enough wood, 10 per energy tower, and then which means we need 2 to reach it, and then we also need 20 in order to build the quarry itself. Not to mention we'll want a barracks eventually, and if we need energy we will need a mill, which also costs wood. Wood is a really important early game resource, especially if you keep recruiting rangers later, which is the only unit we have access to at the moment. I usually do 2 sawmills in this mission, not more. More is really unnecessary, but something to keep in mind is think of your mills and energy like you would a house in Age of Empires 2 or a supply depot in StarCraft. You are effectively supply blocked when you don't have enough energy to build new things, and it's even worse than not having food, as you cannot really build any structures. If you don't have any food, then you can still build other things that don't require food, as you can expand your industry if you have enough workers. So not having workers and energy is effectively being supply capped, and so try to avoid these scenarios as much as possible in order to preserve efficiency. At some point I would recommend splitting off a ranger from the group that's clearing and setting her up in the choke point in the north in order to secure your base. I've seen a shambler come through south pretty early, day 1 or day 2. It is totally possible for one to start coming, and so when the amount of Zeds that are guarding the drop in the south is low enough, you can justify splitting one off and sending her forward. This is the case on a lot of other missions where if you know the locations of pickups, you can kind of rush a certain direction on the map and try to clear in that direction a lot while neglecting the other sides. I'm gonna talk more about that when it becomes more relevant. You can see that on day 2 we already are building the quarry, which means that we've already constructed the 2 required pylons, and we are now building the quarry with 4 energy left, which means that I actually calculated it, and we are now effectively supply capped, but we've expanded enough so that I can justify to myself while only having a little bit of gold left over in the city's coffers, and we will be building a mill soon afterwards in order to continue expanding. Once we have enough stone and other resources, we will establish a soldiers center, which is a building which allows us to recruit more units, namely rangers, which is the only unit we have access to at the moment. We'll be using this to continuously produce units if we have spare gold and wood and workers to make more rangers and rally them to the north, where we will wait at the choke point to clear out any potential enemies. We will see an influx of enemies towards our base as game goes on. I will explain mechanics that are playing into this in a little bit, but for now, namely the XP mechanic. Each soldier accumulates experience as they clear enemies from the map, and when they reach 100% experience they become veterans, and veterans are better at everything they do. They have a longer range, which is very important in an RTS game. Soldiers with higher range are really good. They also have a higher attack rate, they have more attack in general. Note that only the units recruited at the soldiers center are able to achieve veterancy and accumulate XP, which means sniper, ranger and soldier. You can see that resource gathering and expansion is now proceeding at a very rapid pace. When we get enough gold, I always make sure that we have enough buildings going up. If we need food, we make more hunters. If there are no spaces for hunters, we expand energy grid to build more of them. And if we have food and gold and energy, we keep building up tents. It is only necessary to build 300 population in this on this map. But if you play this difficulty, it is very important that you exceed these limits often, as I often go with 3 or 4 soldier centers on this mission, as to not have to worry about the final attack, which can be quite large on this difficulty setting. And so I will often exceed limits set by the game for some of these cities. Soon I expand our energy grid towards the choke point and start setting up a gate and a piece of wall to make sure that no enemies can pass through the bridge from the right side. And we also, thanks to our increased ranger numbers, were able to poke out a little bit at the exposed groups that are coming through choke point and whittle down the numbers without pushing it too much, because there are a lot of runners that populate this map, and as we can see right now, there's already a random attack that happened without any announcement. Maps will throw random attacks at you, and at this point it's not that big of a threat, it's just 15 runners or so, but these numbers will rise, and on later missions these attacks can range in hundreds and you will not receive any sort of announcement that it happens. The real big hordes will be announced, like you can see this, it's in day 16 on the left, but that's the final wave here, and it is quite substantial, but these small attacks are never announced to the player, so always post guards, and I will explain how to defend in detail in maps where it becomes more relevant. Now let's explain how the noise mechanic works. You really do not want on this difficulty for the enemies to be able to freely hit your structures, but not even your walls, because what happens when the walls get hit is that noise is generated. Noise mechanic means that if a unit is shooting, it generates noise. Rangers generate a small amount while soldiers generate more, and snipers even more than that. If units are you move some group of units somewhere, it means that that noise is gonna keep accumulating. It also dissipates over time, so if you spread your units out, it can actually help not attracting that much attention. You will see me use that later when the maps get more elaborate, but for now just know that if even in this first mission on this difficulty, if you let a bunch of enemies claw at your gate and walls, it could absolutely draw in too many, because this map is still, even though it's the first map, it is filled to the brim with runners, and there are even some executives. Which brings me to the three basic kinds of enemies. So I call them shamblers. These are the decrepit infected and the young infected and the old infected. These kinds of enemies are the ones that slowly wobble away towards you with low health. Then you have your runners, which are the infected colonists and their equivalent. And then you have the executives, which also run but also have armor and health. The most of the basic infected, and so even some of these early maps actually are packed with them, so I'm gonna always mention that when it is a big threat. On this first one there are not that many of them, but it could still be a very big problem. Something to note is that the train itself does not hurt your unit, so don't worry about that, but it can smash through enemies, and in some maps it can be used to clear early, which I'm gonna also use in some missions, but not here. Here it really is not that useful. Something else to talk about is also that this game does technically have multi-queue, which means that if you have multiple buildings of the same type, I always control group them. And then there are no hotkeys to queue up units, but I always queue up with buttons, and you can even shift click it to fill it up. Unfortunately, if you do that, some of the time what happens is the buildings don't get filled up, the queues don't get filled up equally, and one barracks could have, or one soldier center rather, could have like 5 units queued up while the other one has 1. Okay, and so sometimes it's good idea to just double check and make sure that they are doing what they are supposed to be doing, because you can't really trust these things too much in this game. On day 11 we got hit by a big group of enemies from the north at the left side where we cleared first, which means that there were no enemies left, but this is another random attack that never got announced, and you can see that the amount of runners can get substantial, and we had defenses in place, fortunately. I always keep some guards, but not enough to deal with this amount of enemies. We also keep rallying troops there, but I had to pull back some of my clearing units at the front to deal with this threat. It is often a good idea to clear the map entirely before the final wave hits. In this case, it's gonna hit on day 16, and the reason for this is every single enemy that's left on the map when the final attack hits will join the final assault, and that could just be what turns it over the edge and really makes you lose. So clearing it out is good for this reason, and the other reason is, of course, exploration is good, so you establish choke points where terrain is safe and you can just see where things are set up in a way where you can just ignore certain areas and where to set up proper defenses. And you can also find resources. If there are villages of doom, which are going to be coming into play a little bit later, these can be smashed for resources, but they are often spawning a huge amount of defenders when you attack them. In any case, there are also just scattered resources on some maps, and so it's a good idea to just clear in general, not to mention the experience you get. As I showed you before, the boosts to your units are substantial, and so every single unit that's veteran before the swarms hit your base can actually be the thing that makes you be able to pull it off. Something to note is that I am not super efficient with microing my units. You could be more even more meticulous and make sure that whoever has veterancy already does not fight, at least not with the clearing, because you can just make sure that your standard units that need experience can keep clearing while the veterans keep guard against the surprise attacks, and that way your frontline units will always be getting experience instead of wasting it by using the veteran units to clear. When the final swarm is approaching, it tells you from which direction it is gonna arrive, and since we know the railway on the right side is safe, it is the railway, therefore it usually doesn't hold a potential attack point. We know that it comes from the left side, as it's the only real exposed edge on this map specifically, and so we can expect it, and we will prepare defenses in terms of setting everyone up. And also, I'm gonna put one ranger in front as we can show off another mechanic. As I showed you micro before, where you can target micro to make units fire faster, which is super useful early game especially. This is gonna help you to split hordes apart in terms of managing them more carefully and without that much of a threat. It's kind of important to have everything safe and ready for it though. If there were random enemies around, this would not be possible. And with this mission done, that's gonna be the first part of this series of videos that is gonna guide you through the 800% campaign. If you want to see more, let me know. I only will do more if people are interested, otherwise there's literally no point to it. I do enjoy making it, but ultimately it depends on you and if you show interest in it. I would preferably also go through research at this point to show and explain that, but it's just too much to go into at this point. We will only do so after we do the next no build mission, which is gonna be the first hero mission of the game, and I might tie that one together with a next build mission so that we see directly where the research has led us. But as for right now, this one has been long because I needed to explain everything in detail. I hope it was not too obtuse. And just keep in mind that even if you're an expert at the game, I need to still explain some of the basic mechanics, and I try to implement some of the more complex things that are a little more obscure and not explained by the game too well. Again, if you have any improvements I could do on my part, or if I had something wrong, which is entirely possible, please let me know. And I hope this helps at least someone out there. That would be my goal, and I thank you for watching. See you around. Bye.